the truth is that there is no power on earth more powerful than the collective intention of a large group of people. Well, I've been doing research in areas of extraordinary human performance for about 50 years. And about 16 years ago, I began thinking about how does this translate into to the social level, not from the, you do individual experiments with people, you're sitting in a laboratory, that kind of thing, and they're doing extraordinary things. And I wanted to know, how does that translate to the social level? Also, 4 times in my life, I've been involved in changing history. And I paid close attention to those things, the civil rights movement, the transformation of the American military from an elitist conscription draft-based organization to an all-volunteer meritocracy, and citizen diplomacy between the Soviet Union and the United States. And I watched carefully, what worked and what didn't work. And I began looking at other social transformational movements to try to figure out what were they doing that worked and why did some succeed and some failed. And the answer, it turns out, is their approach to consciousness. So what I've done in this latest book that I've done, The 8 Laws of Change, is try to put together a manual that people can use. And I'm here now at a time when France has experienced a dreadful wound. And I'm struck by the dedication of the French people to not allow this to distort their lives too much. And it's a decision of mass consciousness. Most people feel that, well, I don't have an official position, I don't have any money to speak of, I don't have any particular power, so what can I do? And I wanted to produce an instruction that was based entirely on science, not theory, not my speculations or my philosophies, but the science of how social transformation works. And there's a lot of research on this, it's just not pulled together. So I think it's particularly apt that I'm doing this in France at a time when the issue of consciousness is very present in the front of everybody's mind. And the truth is that there is no power on earth more powerful than the collective intention of a large group of people. More than that, we know how many people you have to get. You have about 66 million people in France. Research shows that whenever 10% of any cohort of people change their opinion, the whole cohort changes. So this is really addressed at 6.6 million French people. And what I'm really trying to say is you have the power to change the course of your history. And it doesn't require money. It doesn't require armies. If you look at actual changes, I've looked at all the social transformational changes, not just myself, but other researchers as well, by the way, from 1900 to 2006. And there's hundreds of them. When you start examining them closely, you discover that changes that are wrought by violence only succeed 25% of the time. And rarely do they succeed completely, and even more importantly, they don't last. I mean, if you think about it, the changes wrought by the French Revolution in the 18th century didn't last very long. The changes wrought by the uprising in the Soviet Union that brought in communism only lasted about 70 years, which from the point of view of history is, an eye blink. It's a single person's lifetime. But if you look at changes which are brought about through nonviolence, through a commitment to compassionate, life-affirming wellness, those changes, because they're inclusive and because they touch the heart, they last. Here's what it takes. And if 1,000 people see this interview and take this pledge and do what I'm about to describe, they can change the course of France's history. Here it is, very simple. First of all, be aware that you make decisions all day long. Most people actually aren't. When you go into the supermarket and you buy a particular breakfast cereal or a toothpaste, you don't really think very much about it. It's the toothpaste your mother gave you when you were a little person, or it's what your roommate at school used, or whatever you got into the habit, and that's what you buy, right? You don't really think about the company that produced it. Is this a company that treats its workers well? Is this a company that is ecologically aware? Or is this a company that exploits its workers and treats the environment badly? Well, first of all, you have to become conscious of the choices you're making. And then of the options that are available to you. If you look at each option and you choose the option that is the most compassionate and life-affirming, the most wellness-producing of those options that you have available. Now, none of them may be great, but inevitably one of them is always more compassionate and life-affirming and wellness-producing than the others. And you consistently, every day, through the course of your day, make the choice that is compassionate and life-affirming. And you tell 10 friends that you're doing this and invite them to join you and invite them to tell 10 of their friends. You can just do the math. If you have 1,000 people that you start with who watch this interview and make this pledge, and they tell 10 friends, well, now we have 10,000 plus the original 1,000, that's 11,000. And then they tell 10 more, now we have 100,000. Then they tell 10 more, now we have 1,000,000. Then they tell 10 more, now we have 10 million. So in just those few jumps, you've changed the behavior of an entire culture. And we have examples of this. In the United States, for instance, I don't know, I haven't been able to do enough research in France to know exactly how this went, but in the United States, about 15 months ago, there was a shift in consciousness about gender in the United States. And it manifested itself in the decision to say LGBT and not gay. Now, the president didn't go on television and say to people, we are going to change from gay to LGBT. No newspapers came out with a campaign to do that. It's just ordinary people, when they would say gay, would say LGBT, or if they were writing it. Now, that's not just a change in term, that's a change in concept. It's a change in how to look at an individual's right to their own gender identification. And now, if you do a Google word search, for instance, you will see that the majority choose LGBTs. That's a shift in consciousness. In the United States, marriage equality. 10 years ago, everybody was against it. Now, not everybody, but a majority of people are for it. Why? Because consciousness changed. The key to social change is intentioned, focused awareness and a commitment to make the life-affirming choice. And so I'm quite serious when I say, if 1,000 people who see this interview will make this pledge, you can change the course of France's history. Just before Gandhi was assassinated, he was approached by a journalist who said to him, Gandhiji, my editor would like to ask you one question. And he said, well, what's the question? And the reporter said, my editor wants to know how you forced the British to leave India. You didn't have an army. You don't have any money. You held no official position. The British were the most powerful country in the world at that time. They had been in India for 300 years. They considered India the crown jewel of their empire. How did you force them to leave? And Gandhi's answer reveals what I'm talking about. He said, it's not what we did that mattered, although that mattered. It's not what we said that mattered, although that mattered. It was the nature of our character that made the British re-examine their position and choose to leave India. Notice the difference in the verb force and choose. This was ordinary people. Ordinary, mostly illiterate, poorly educated, very poor Indians who just said, I'm changing, I'm going to change my world. And they forced the most powerful country at that time to abandon their empire. I wrote this book, The 8 Laws of Change, particularly because I felt that we stood at a crossroads. If you look at the research, I'm a database person. I don't really care about politics. I'm not very interested in speculations and philosophies. I look at data. And if you look at the data, what you see is that the world is in the throes of massive change. Just look at sea rise. Just take one example. I mean, I could give you dozens of examples, but let's just take one. We now know that as a result of the melting of Greenland and of the Arctic ice pack, that sea rise is going to happen and that it's going to be significant. In the United States, for instance, 400 cities are going to experience massive submergence. Miami, New York, Washington, Baltimore, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, all of those cities are going to be profoundly changed, and a city like Miami may disappear. You look at France, you look at Marseille, you look at Biarritz. It's not uniform across the whole world because some areas are going to experience it worse than others, but all coastal cities are going to experience sea rise. In some cases, like Bangladesh, whole countries may disappear or largely disappear. So we're at a place where if we don't choose the life-affirming, compassionate choice, the world we're going to leave our children and our grandchildren is going to be so radically different than the world that we grew up in, it'll be unrecognizable. So I think we don't really have a choice. I mean, if you want to have your children and grandchildren grow up to a world that resembles in any way the kind of beauty and ecology that we have today, you must do this. I mean, from my perspective, looking at the data, we don't have a choice. It is choose the life-affirming, compassionate decision of the options available to you or face the consequences.